What I love is to see something done by hand better than can possibly be done with modern machinery. And this old horseshoe buckle trade harness of ours was made over 50 years ago. Still got my father's initials on the decorations, Arthur Hargreaves, A.H., and every single strap of it was cut with a knife, and every single stitch of it was made by hand, and it's still absolutely perfect. There's just one thing wrong with it as far as putting it on our new horse Blue in order to further our tilt cart adventure, and that is that along the way the collars got changed. This is not the original collar because presumably they changed it for another horse, and it didn't. The first one didn't fit him. And the other thing about it is that when they bought this collar, they bought the hames, and they're not the original hames. They got plain rings instead of horseshoe buckles. And anyway, it turns out that it doesn't fit Blue. You see, when you buy a collar for a horse, people nowadays buy it by a length. They buy an 18-inch collar or a 21-inch collar or whatever it may be. But in fact, you can have a collar of the right length for a horse that doesn't fit him at all, because it's really got to fit him absolutely everywhere. And in the old days, a man used to come along with a pair of calipers and satisfy himself exactly. So that gave us an opportunity to, an excuse to go and have a new collar made. And we went off to see one of the few men in England who can still make one. And when we went, he took a collar which fitted Blue. We went through a lot of second-hand collars until we found one that really fitted the horse everywhere, and instead of talking to Mr. Huskisson about measurements, we just took this collar along and says, this one fits him absolutely perfectly. And the interesting thing was, I can tell you who made that collar. He said as soon as he saw it, it was made about 50 years ago. I'll bet it's still as good as new. And it was made just the way he set out to make one for us. And of course, the thing that fascinates me about a lot of these old crafts, I remember it struck me particularly about the bookbinder when I got to know him, was the absolute simplicity of their tools and materials. He hadn't got many tools, Mr. Huskisson. He's got a pair of scissors, 2 or 3 saddler's knives, some awls, saddler's awls, and some needles. Otherwise, he goes about it just almost like a housewife would. You can see what he's taken here is a big sheet of calf leather. He's terribly particular about the way his leather is tanned. It comes, I think, most of it's from the West Country, where it's still bark tanned in the old-fashioned way and shaved down to the thicknesses he wants, and it comes up with beautiful softness. And he takes paper patterns, or rather cardboard patterns which he's made, and marks them out, just like somebody who was dressmaking. And he's going to cut here what is in fact the most important thing about the whole collar, what gives it its whole shape and character, and also its quality. What he's making here is what's called the fore-wale of the collar, to say the rounded front edge of it, and it's done by taking these pieces of leather and sewing them into a tube, and onto the tube sewing a skirt. There really doesn't seem at first sight to be much to it, except that what my father used to say about going to the chemist to get a prescription made up. He used to say it's 6pence for stuff and 2 and 6 for knowing how. And that is just about what is true of what you're watching here, because it took him 50 years to learn this job, and he learned it from his father, who learned it from his grandfather. And nothing nowadays can equal it. Now you can, in fact, when something is done this way, by a man who took this long to learn it, nowadays is apt to be expensive. And naturally enough, if something becomes expensive, then somebody tries to find a way of getting into the market less expensively and more profitably, because it takes him, I should think, probably 10 hours at least to make this collar. They make horse collars nowadays which look quite smart, and they make them by making a plastic shell for them and then filling them up with plastic foam. And when they first come out into the show ring, they look frightfully smart. But I've known people who've used them, and they say that with very little work indeed, they will crumble and start to lose their consistency. And quite apart from the fact that they break up with work, they will make the horses sort of sore very soon. Because when you realize that a horse doing work is carrying absolutely all the effort on this collar, and that effort is being carried on skin, which is close over bone, it really has got to be a fit. There's absolutely nobody at all in this enterprise, which is famous. At the time when I went up to see him, he had just finished making a 4-in-hand set of harness for George Bowman, who was famous British driving champion. But there's absolutely nothing in this place except Mr. Huskisson and his cat and his son. Now you see how the pieces he's cut are being sewn together. As always, he makes the hole with the awl, and then he works with 2 needles, one from each side, pushing them towards one another and tightening the stitch with 2 threads at once. And you can see already that the pieces of thing have become a calfskin tube onto which he is now putting the skirt. And that tube is handed over to the younger Mr. Huskisson, who is going to stuff it. And this is an absolutely critical proceeding. He's an interesting man, the young Mr. Huskisson. He's the only man for generations of this business who didn't follow his father into saddle making. His father was very keen that he should have a modern profession. He went off and trained as accountant. And he stood about a few years of being accountant, and then he arrived home and said, "I'm sorry, I don't want anything to do with that. I'm coming back to work with you." Now, once again, we're dealing with very simple matters here, but very special matters. What he's stuffing it with is rye straw. They won't have anything to do with wheat straw, and they won't have anything to do with oat straw or any of the common straws. They do it with rye straw. And when you realize that there's virtually no rye grown in Britain at the present moment, that's a problem to him. In fact, Mr. Huskisson has to get somebody to grow the rye straw especially for him. And each year a small crop of rye is grown in order that the straw can go into these collars. And one year, when the farmer was in trouble with labour, he actually had to go out with his son and help harvest the rye straw that was needed to get them through the next year. And this again looks like a simple process. With that long fork-like thing, he drives into it a little bit of rye straw at a time. But he's got to drive it in so it ends up of absolutely even consistency and absolutely even hardness, tension, and it's got to form itself not into just a straight stuffed tube, but into a curved one. And all the time he's making sure there are no lumps in it. You saw him a moment ago take the hammer out and tap it down in order to even it out. And gradually, as he gets it fuller and fuller, he drives harder and harder and harder, and so the tension in this fore-wheel, in this loop of leather tube, becomes tighter and tighter and tighter until it's almost like a piece of steamed and shaped timber. And that is that shape for 2 reasons. Not only because Mr. Huskisson Sr. cut it to a pattern which would force it to take that shape and sewed it to that pattern, altering the tension of its stitches, but also because the young Mr. Huskisson has stuffed it in such a way that the fore-wheel now has an immensely subtle shape. And now into it goes cotton woolly substance, over which will go once again armfuls of rice straw, tightened and sewn into the back of the collar. You can't believe that out of such apparently rough work and out of such apparently primitive materials, which they are not, because everyone is carefully selected, is going to come such a subtle piece of apparatus. And the colour, the shape and the curves of the fore-whale are now being automatically transferred to the bulk of the collar, which will rest against his neck. And that's really all there is to it. And that's really all there has been to a horse collar since anyone you like, Charles I was driven behind one. But it's all been handed down, and it all goes to produce something which none of the machines or the modern techniques have been able to come anywhere near equaling. You see that he knocks everything into it with Tintax. And in fact the straw in that stuffing is now so hard that it'll take Tintax and hold things in place. And now over goes the cover, and this is specially tanned patent leather. It looks in fact not much different at a distance from the black plastic that will be used for one of the modern foam-filled colours, but it's very carefully selected, very tanned and very carefully selected patent leather with the decorations that I've asked for sewn into it already. And that's how it's going to finish up. I picked that one up. That's just to show the subtlety of its final shape. It's another one, different from mine. You see, that one was made with a black fore-whale and with no decoration on the cover. Well, there it was when he finished it. That's what you saw him just make. With all the additions, those are the covers that are put on the fore-whale in order that the rains can't rub through it over the thing. And all the time he was making it, he was waiting at the same time for the foundry, which works close to him, to make another pair of hames. And this time the pair of hames was made with the real thing, with the horseshoe buckles on it, which make it genuine. So now we have something there. You saw it made by hand, which in 50 years' time is going to be as good as it is now, which actually turns out to fit blue absolutely to perfection, and which won't give and lose its strength or tension in any amount of work, and which restores the whole of our outfit to its original perfection. Cheerio.